In the distant galaxy of Xeron, humans were rare. Their reputation had spread across star systems like wildfire, often whispered about in fear. The humans weren't like the aliens who had established great empires and scientific progress across the universe. They were different. They were unpredictable. That was both their greatest strength and their most terrifying weakness. At the heart of Xeron's largest mining colony, a place known as Sector 9, there lived one such human, Graham Ward. But to the people of Sector 9, Graham was known as the grumpy human. He was not the type to make friends, smile often, or engage in pointless small talk. To be fair, he didn't care if people liked him. After all, he wasn't here to make friends. He was here to work, and that's exactly what he did. Graham was a skilled engineer. He knew machines like the back of his hand. No one in Sector 9 could match his abilities when it came to fixing broken circuits, or starting power grids, or building new equipment for the colony's extensive mining operations. But despite his talents, Graham was always alone. The other workers feared him. They whispered behind his back, not understanding him, and sometimes even pretending he didn't exist. His gruff manner, sharp tongue, and constant frown made him seem unapproachable. He preferred it that way. After all, the last thing he wanted was to be a part of the social cliques that ruled the colony. They were full of bureaucracy, politics, and endless meetings. None of that interested him. Graham had arrived on Sector 9 years ago. He had no family, no ties to anyone. There was a rumor that he had come here to escape something, though no one really knew what. What they did know was that he worked hard, and that was what made him valuable. If a machine broke down, Graham was the one who fixed it. If there was an issue with the power grid, Graham was the one who handled it. He was an expert at what he did. But his interactions with others were as cold as the machines he worked on. The aliens who populated the colony didn't understand why a human would choose to live alone. With no interest in the community, they didn't know about the dark past he kept buried deep within him. A past that shaped him into the person he was today. For Graham, the loss of his family years ago had left him with only one focus: work. Machines didn't betray you. They didn't break your heart. They were predictable. But people were messy, emotional, and ultimately unreliable. So Graham had chosen to keep his distance. The incident one day, everything changed. It began like any other. The sun barely peeked over the horizon of the mining colony, casting an orange glow over the metal structures of Sector 9. The hum of machinery echoed through the air as workers prepared for another long day of labor. However, there was something wrong. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the power grids went completely dark. The colony was plunged into silence. It was only for a few seconds, but that small interruption was enough to send a wave of panic through the workers. The emergency lights kicked on, casting a soft red glow over the entire station. Not again, Graham muttered to himself, standing up from his workbench, where he had been tinkering with an old circuit board. The colony's power grid wasn't exactly stable. It had been malfunctioning for weeks now, and Graham had warned the council about it many times. But the leaders of Sector 9, made up of different alien species, had never taken him seriously. They were more concerned with the politics of the colony than the well-being of the workers. As long as things were still running, they didn't care about the problems underneath the surface. They had been wrong. Graham didn't wait for anyone to give him permission. He immediately grabbed his tool belt and walked briskly toward the power core control room. His pace was quick, and there was a sense of purpose in the way he moved. He wasn't just an engineer. He was the one who kept everything running. He didn't expect anyone to come with him, and no one did. As always, he was alone. The workers watched him pass by, some offering him nervous glances, others pretending not to notice him at all. To them, he was just the grumpy human who kept to himself. They didn't realize how important he was, how important he had always been. The power. The Power Core was the heart of Sector 9. It was a massive, complex system of reactors, wires, and conduits that kept the entire colony alive. Without it, everything would grind to a halt. The mining operations, the communications, the air supply was all dependent on this one system. And Graham was the one person who could fix it when it broke down. When he entered the power core room, He saw the problem immediately. The main reactor had been damaged, and it was beginning to short-circuit. Sparks flew from one of the conduits, and the lights flickered again. Graham scowled as he inspected the damage. This wasn't just a simple malfunction. Someone had tampered with the system. I knew it, he muttered, tapping his fingers against his chin. He began to work quickly, his mind already racing through potential solutions. As he worked, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of urgency. This wasn't just an equipment failure, it was sabotage. The colony was in danger, but as he worked, he also knew that the Council would never believe him. They would dismiss this as another technical glitch, just like all the others. They didn't understand how serious this was. Only Graham saw the bigger picture. He didn't just repair machines. He understood them. He could feel when something wasn't right. He reached for his toolkit and began to dismantle the damaged reactor. His hands moved swiftly, pulling wires, tightening bolts, and realigning circuits. Sweat trickled down his face, but he didn't stop. Every second counted. The hum of the reactor grew louder, and the lights flickered again. But this time, they didn't come back on. The power in the entire colony shut down. The call for help. Graham didn't panic. He knew that if he didn't fix the reactor soon, the entire station would be in darkness. The backup systems would kick in, but they weren't designed for long-term use. If the colony didn't get power back soon, everything would shut down. He quickly ran through his options in his mind. The emergency crew would take too long to get there. They didn't have his skills, and they weren't prepared for this kind of emergency. There was only one person who could fix this, and that person was Graham Ward. But as he worked on the reactor, a thought lingered in his mind. He had always worked alone, but maybe this time it would be different. Maybe he couldn't fix this on his own. He might have to ask for help. With that thought, Graham keyed in a distress signal on the emergency communication panel. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of frustration in it. Attention. Power core malfunction. Sabotage suspected. Immediate assistance required at reactor level 2. All personnel, report to the control room. Graham Ward out. For a brief moment, Graham allowed himself a deep breath. He had done what he could. Now it was up to the others to realize the danger. The Council's response sat at the Council's headquarters. The call for help was met with confusion. The colony's leaders, a mix of aliens, each with their own agendas, gathered in their chambers. They debated back and forth, arguing about who should take responsibility for the failure. The alien diplomats and officials spoke in high-pitched voices demanding action, but none of them seemed willing to take the first step. All the while, Graham remained at the power core, working tirelessly to contain the damage. He wasn't waiting for the Council to decide. He was taking matters into his own hands. They had failed to act. They had always failed to act. Graham didn't wait for anyone. He couldn't afford to. As the power core's warning lights flashed red, signaling an emergency, Graham worked faster. His mind raced, but his hands moved with practiced ease. He had seen these problems before, but never on this scale. The malfunction wasn't just a technical glitch, this was sabotage. He didn't need to be told. His instincts screamed that someone was deliberately trying to destroy the power core, the heart of the entire colony. He tightened a bolt on a circuit panel, and then carefully moved a lever to stop a cascading energy surge that was threatening to overload the entire reactor. Sweat dripped down his brow, but he didn't pause. The station was relying on him. Outside the control room, voices grew louder. Graham could hear the sound of hurried footsteps approaching the power core's entrance. It was the emergency team, a group of workers who were supposed to deal with these kinds of issues. Normally, they'd be competent, but Graham knew better. They were too slow, too inexperienced. He was the only one who could save the colony now, Graham. The voice of Tara, the alien diplomat, rang out from the doorway. Her tone was urgent, but there was a trace of disbelief in her voice. What's going on in there? The power's down across the entire colony. The Council is losing its patience. We need answers. Graham didn't look up as he continued to work. It's sabotage, he muttered, his voice rough and focused. The power core has been tampered with. Someone wants this place to go dark. Tara's eyes widened. Sabotage. Who would? I don't know, Graham interrupted, not sparing her a glance. But I'll find out. You need to leave. This is dangerous. Dangerous. Tara took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. We can't leave you here alone. The entire colony is at risk. Graham didn't respond. He couldn't afford to waste time arguing. He had to keep moving. The colony's backup power systems were already struggling to keep everything running, and they wouldn't last long without the main reactor online. He had to act quickly. As Tara hesitated, Vance, a former soldier turned station security officer, stepped up behind her. His expression was as hard as stone. He looked at Graham, and for a moment, Graham saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. You're right, Tara, Vance said, his voice steady. But if it's sabotage, we need to find out who's behind it before things get worse. Graham gave him a quick, sharp look, but then nodded. Fine. You can stay and help, but don't get in my way. I know what I'm doing. Tara and Vance exchanged a glance, clearly concerned, but they didn't argue. Instead, they pulled on their own work gear and stood back, ready to assist where they could. It wasn't much, but every extra pair of hands would make a difference together. They worked in silence, with only the sound of tools clanging and the hum of failing equipment filling the air. The lights flickered again, this time staying off for longer periods. The emergency backup systems were struggling to keep things running. The atmosphere in the power core was getting tense. The Council's response, meanwhile, the Council chambers, chaos was brewing. The leaders of the colony, a mix of alien species, had gathered to discuss the crisis. The power failure had set off alarms across Sector 9, and the Council couldn't ignore it any longer. The once quiet building was now filled with frantic discussions. How long until we lose all power? Asked Ravek, a tall, blue-skinned alien with multiple eyes, representing the mining guilds. His voice was sharp with concern. We don't have much time, said Iris, a member of the colony's Resource Management Council. She was a short, silver-skinned alien with an analytical mind, but even she was starting to show signs of stress. The backup systems are failing. We might lose the colony's power grid completely if we don't act fast. You don't understand, interrupted Dry, a quiet alien representative from the agricultural sector. This could be much worse than just power failure. We're talking about a complete collapse of infrastructure. The entire colony could be in danger if we don't secure the reactor. The council members glanced nervously at each other. There were murmurs of unease, but no one spoke up immediately. Finally, Tara's voice crackled through the communication system. Interrupting their fearful chatter, we're at the power core now. Graham Ward is in charge. It's sabotage. Someone has tampered with the core. We need immediate reinforcements and assistance. The mention of Graham Ward's name sent a chill through the room. There was no love lost between the council and the grumpy human engineer. His reputation as a solitary, often abrasive individual had made him unpopular among the council members. They had never trusted him fully, but now they had no choice. His expertise was the colony's only hope. We'll send a team to assist, Ravak said reluctantly. But we can't afford to lose any more time. We need Graham to fix this, and fast. The discovery back at the power core. Graham was getting closer to the source of the damage. He had already bypassed several malfunctioning circuits and was working on the central reactor. His fingers moved quickly, checking for any signs of tampering, but his mind couldn't help but wander. Who would do this? Who would risk everything to bring down a colony that was thriving? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft click, a sound almost imperceptible, but it made his heart race. He wasn't alone. Someone's been here, he muttered under his breath. He turned to Vance and Tara. Check the area. Someone's been trying to access the core directly. Vance nodded and moved quickly to check the outer sections of the control room. Tara stood by Graham, watching him work. This doesn't make sense, she said, her voice quieter now. Who would want to destroy everything here? The colony is stable. We're making progress. I don't care about their reasons, Graham said, his voice low but fierce. Whoever's behind this is making a mistake. I won't let them win. Just as Graham finished reattaching a set of wires to stabilize the reactor, the door to the control room burst open. A group of station security officers rushed in, led by Captain Alara, the head of security. "We're here to assist," Captain Alara said, though there was a trace of skepticism in her voice as she took in the sight of Graham working alone. "You're too late," Graham snapped. "This is far more than just a little glitch. We're dealing with sabotage. Get ready to work, or get out of my way." Captain Alara didn't argue. Instead, she signaled her team to help stabilize the power grid and assist in locking down the area. But even as they worked, there was an unease in the air. No one was sure who was behind the sabotage or how deep it went. But one thing was clear: Graham had been right all along. This was not just a simple technical issue. Someone had it out for the colony, and they weren't stopping until it was brought to the ground. The countdown as the hours passed, Graham's frustration grew. The power core was stable for now, but he knew it wouldn't last long. The sabotage had been methodical, well planned. This wasn't the work of a single individual. It was a coordinated effort, and whoever was behind it was prepared for a long fight. "This is bad," Tara said quietly as she watched Graham's hands fly over the control panels. "How long do you think we have before the core shuts down completely?" Graham didn't answer. Instead, he focused all his energy on the reactor. His mind raced through different plans, each more dangerous than the last. The deeper he went into the core, the more he realized that the sabotage was only the beginning of a much larger plot. The power core hummed ominously, but the lights in the colony remained dim. The emergency backups were struggling to maintain even the most basic functions, and the air felt thick with tension. Every passing minute brought the colony closer to total failure, and Graham knew that no one would act as fast or as decisively as he could. Tara, Vance, and Captain Alara had quickly grown accustomed to the chaos, but Graham remained unfazed. His hands worked mechanically, twisting wrenches, tightening bolts, and inspecting panels with the meticulous focus of a craftsman. The emergency team had followed his orders without question, but it was clear that Graham was in control. No one else had his expertise. "We don't have much time," Tara said, her voice tight with stress. "The council is demanding answers. They're getting impatient." Graham grunted but didn't answer her. He couldn't afford to listen to the council right now. They hadn't taken his warnings seriously, and now they were scrambling, trying to save face. But they wouldn't be the ones saving the colony. That responsibility lay with him and only him. "Tell the council," Graham said without looking up from the control panel, "that we'll need more than just words if we're going to fix this." Tara hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped toward the comms panel, speaking to the council directly. "We're making progress," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "But we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Graham believes this is more than just a power failure. He thinks someone on the inside is responsible. "We need the full support of the colony to track them down." The council's response was quick but vague. "We don't have time for accusations, Tara. This needs to be handled swiftly and quietly. Find a solution now." Graham slammed his hand against the control panel in frustration, making everyone in the room jump. The lights flickered again, and a loud electrical buzz echoed through the room. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This was no time for anger. "They're all worried about appearances," Graham muttered under his breath. "They'll never see the bigger picture." Tara turned away from the comms panel, her face tight with frustration. "I know. But they won't listen to us if we don't give them something they can act on." Graham nodded, though he didn't feel much better. He had seen this kind of bureaucracy before: leaders who acted out of fear, not knowledge. If the council didn't make a decision soon, it wouldn't matter. There would be nothing left of the colony to save. A dangerous discovery, meanwhile. Vance had been busy inspecting the outer sections of the power core, following Graham's orders. The former soldier turned security officer wasn't the type to sit back and wait. He was trained to act, and that's exactly what he did. He checked every connection, every wire, every possible route someone could have used to sabotage the system. And it didn't take him long to find something unusual, Graham Vance called out, his voice sharp. "You need to see this." Graham's heart skipped a beat, and he rushed over to where Vance was standing. The security officer pointed at a section of the power core's wall. There, embedded in the metal, was a small, hidden panel one that Graham had never seen before. It wasn't on any of the schematics. It was as if someone had added it there recently. This wasn't part of the original design, Vance said, his voice low. Someone's been here. This panel wasn't made by the regular maintenance crew. Graham crouched down, his hands moving quickly to pry open the hidden panel. Inside was a small device, a strange, alien-made chip, glowing faintly blue. It looked almost like a miniaturized power core of its own, but much smaller and much more dangerous. Is that? Tara's voice trailed off as she stepped closer. Sabotage, Graham said, his voice cold. Whoever's behind this isn't just shutting down the power. They're trying to take control. Graham carefully removed the device from its place and held it up, inspecting it closely. The faint glow from the chip seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. It's some sort of control device, Graham muttered. This thing isn't just draining power, it's redirecting it. It's trying to override the core's central systems. Vance clenched his fists. Can you shut it down? Graham shook his head. Not without risking a complete meltdown. This device is too well hidden. If I try to remove it too quickly, it could trigger a fail-safe and cause a chain reaction. Tara swallowed hard, her expression grim. So we're stuck. No, Graham said firmly. We're not stuck. But we need to act quickly, and we need more help. If we don't find out who did this soon, it's over. The decision, the colony's power was now down to less than 10% capacity. Every minute that passed made it harder to keep the lights on, to keep life support running, to maintain any sense of normalcy. The colony was slowly, quietly falling apart. The emergency crew worked as hard as they could, but the task was beyond them. They weren't engineers. They didn't have Graham's skills. It was clear to everyone that the situation was becoming dire. We need to tell the council everything, Tara said quietly, her voice heavy with the weight of the decision. They can't ignore us anymore. If we don't have their support, we won't be able to fix this. Graham stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. The council will do nothing. They'll sit on their hands and wait until it's too late. This has always been how they operate. They won't take action until it's already over. He turned to Vance, who was watching him closely. I'm not waiting for them. We're going to find the person who did this, and we're going to stop them. I don't care if the council likes it or not. Vance nodded, his face hardening. I'm with you, Tara hesitated, but then gave a small nod of agreement. All right, but we can't do it alone. We'll need to rally the workers. They trust you, Graham. They'll follow you. Graham let out a sharp breath. Fine. But if we do this, there's no turning back. We go after whoever did this, and we do it on our terms. The hunt begins. The team moved quickly. They knew the sabotage wasn't just a random act hit. It was part of something bigger. Someone had targeted the colony, and the damage they had caused was calculated, precise. But who and why? Graham led the way through the corridors of Sector 9, each step filled with purpose. As they made their way to the main communications room, they began to gather people. Workers, engineers, and soldiers alike started to take notice of Graham's determination. They weren't sure what was happening. They knew one thing for certain, the grumpy human wasn't going to back down by the time they reached the communications room. Graham had assembled a small but determined group. The workers didn't ask questions. They knew something big was going down, and they trusted Graham to lead them. We need to find out who's responsible, Graham said, addressing the group. They're the ones pulling the strings. We'll track them down, and we'll stop them no matter what it takes. The workers nodded in agreement, and the tension in the air shifted from fear to resolve. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of their colony. And with Graham leading them, they finally had hope. But as they prepared to move forward, no one could shake the feeling that the hardest part of the battle was yet to come. To be continued? The air inside the communications room was thick with anticipation. Every person in the room, whether they were an engineer, a soldier, or a miner, knew the gravity of the situation. Graham Ward had led them this far, and now there was no turning back. The power core was still unstable. The colony's lights flickered dimly, and everyone knew they didn't have much time before the entire system failed. Graham stood at the front, his eyes scanning the small group of workers who had gathered around him. They looked tired but determined. They knew that the council had abandoned them, that they couldn't rely on anyone but themselves. And, surprisingly, they were looking to Graham the Grumpy, distant engineer for leadership. "We can't let this sabotage go unpunished," Graham said, his voice low but firm. "We've got to find the person who did this. We need to get to the bottom of this before it's too late. If we don't stop them now, Sector 9 is finished." The workers nodded, their faces serious. They were ready. "I've got a few ideas," said Vance. It's a former soldier who had stuck by Graham's side from the beginning. He stood beside Graham, his expression unreadable. "The sabotage is more than just an attack on the power core. Someone's trying to take control of everything here. We need to find the source of the device Graham uncovered. That's where we'll get our answers." Tara, who had been watching the exchange closely, stepped forward. "You're right. But where do we start? We don't even know who the target is." "That's the problem," Graham said, his voice gruff as always. "We don't have enough information, but I know we're not the only ones affected. Other parts of the colony's infrastructure will be targeted too. We need to find out where else this sabotage is happening." The tension in the room was palpable. The workers exchanged uncertain glances, but no one spoke up. They didn't need to. They knew that Graham was right. The sabotage wasn't random. It was calculated, and it was likely a coordinated effort. "All right," Graham continued. "We'll split into 2 teams. One team will stay here to monitor the power grid and the core. The rest of us will search the colony for any other signs of tampering. Keep your eyes open for anything unusual, anything that doesn't belong. And if we find something, we report it immediately," Graham said, his voice cold. "We don't have time for second guesses. We act fast." The workers nodded, and with that, the teams dispersed, heading in different directions. But before they left, Graham pulled Tara aside. "I need you to stay sharp." "Tara," he said quietly, his face more serious than ever. "I know you're not exactly used to this kind of thing, but you've got a good head on your shoulders. I need you to think like a strategist." Tara's expression softened. "I'll do my best, Graham. I trust you." That was all he needed to hear. He gave her a curt nod and then turned away, ready focused on the task at hand. "The search begins." Graham led his team down the narrow corridors of Sector 9, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the metal walls. The station was quiet, too quiet. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to break. The tension in the air made it feel like something was about to go horribly wrong as they walked. Graham couldn't help but notice how the workers had begun to look at him differently. They were no longer just afraid of him. They respected him, and that was something he hadn't expected. He had always kept his distance from others, unwilling to let anyone close. But now, with everything on the line, he felt like they were all in this together. No longer isolated, Graham realized that he had something they all shared, a sense of responsibility. They had been left to fend for themselves, but somehow, they were beginning to form a bond born out of necessity, and perhaps even respect. He looked over at Vance, who walked alongside him, his face set in grim determination. Despite his tough exterior, Vance had been a loyal ally since the beginning, someone Graham could count on in the worst of times. But even Vance seemed to have softened since the beginning of this crisis. Perhaps like Graham. The man was realizing that sometimes it wasn't enough to just survive. You had to fight for something more. "So you think the sabotage is connected to the workers?" Vance asked, breaking the silence as they moved forward. Graham shook his head. "I don't know yet. It could be someone within the colony's leadership, or someone who has access to the station's systems. The fact that this device was hidden inside the power core means the person knew what they were doing." Vance nodded, his eyes scanning the shadows as they walked. "And they knew exactly where to hit." Graham didn't reply, but he knew Vance was right. Whoever had planned this attack was highly skilled, and they had been patient. They hadn't just decided to sabotage the station on a whim. They'd been planning this for a long time, and that made Graham's blood run cold. Who could be behind something like this? But there was no time to waste on speculation. They needed answers. A close call, the team arrived at the colony's central control hub, where the colony's communication systems were monitored. It was a large room, filled with blinking lights and computer terminals. Graham moved straight to the central console, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he accessed the system's logs. "There," Graham muttered. "I knew it. The system's been accessed remotely. Someone's been using an outside connection to control parts of the station." Vance stepped closer, peering over Graham's shoulder. "How long has this been going on?" Graham frowned. "It's hard to say. The logs have been tampered with, but I can tell that it's been going on for weeks. Whoever's behind this has been using a back door to control certain systems. Can we trace it back to them?" Tara asked, entering the room with a worried expression on her face. "I'll try," Graham said, his fingers tapping faster. "But it's going to take time. We need to find the source of this connection before it spreads further." Before Graham could continue, the room's emergency alarms suddenly blared, sending a shockwave of panic through the team. A loud, distorted voice echoed over the loudspeakers. "Warning. Security breach detected in reactor chamber. All personnel report to their designated safety zones." The voice cut off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Everyone looked at each other, unsure of what had just happened. "We're too late," Graham muttered under his breath. "They've triggered the reactor. They're trying to force us into a lockdown." "We can't let them win," Vance said, his voice cold. "Let's go. We need to stop this before it's too late." The team rushed out of the room, heading straight for the reactor chamber. The sounds of the alarms and warning signals echoed through the narrow corridors as they moved quickly, adrenaline pumping through their veins. Confrontation at the reactor when they reached the reactor chamber. The door was locked down. Graham didn't waste a second. He pulled out his toolkit and began working on the door's control panel. His fingers flew over the keys, his mind racing through the possibilities. "There's no time for this," Vance shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "Shut up, Vance," Graham snapped, barely looking up. "I'm almost there." With a final click, the door slid open. The team rushed inside, their eyes scanning the room. At the far end, standing in front of the reactor's control console, was a lone figure. The person's back was to them, but they could feel the power of their presence. The figure turned slowly, and Graham's heart skipped a beat. It was Ravok, the head of the mining guilds. The one person who had always opposed Graham's every move. The one person who had the power to make or break everything. "Well, well, well," Ravok said with a wicked grin. "It seems I've underestimated you, human. But now it's too late. I control the reactor. I control the colony." Graham's fists clenched. "Not for long," he said, stepping forward, ready to end this once and for all. The air in the reactor chamber was heavy with tension, each breath feeling like it might be the last. Graham's heart pounded in his chest, and he could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Across the room stood Ravok, the head of the mining guilds, his grin wide and full of malice. Ravok had been the one pulling the strings all along. He was the mastermind behind the sabotage, the one who had quietly worked to bring down the entire colony. Graham's hands tightened into fists, his knuckles white. He wasn't going to let Ravok destroy everything. "Not today. You think you've won?" Ravok's voice was cold, mocking. "You're too late, human. The reactor is mine now. The colony is mine. I will control everything from here on out." Graham stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "Not if I can help it." Ravok's eyes flashed with amusement. "You think you can stop me? You've already lost. This reactor's countdown has already started. In 15 minutes, everything will be destroyed. The power will go out forever. Your precious colony? Gone." Graham's mind raced. He had known the stakes were high, but now it was clear. Ravok was pushing the colony toward destruction. But there had to be a way to stop him. There had to be a way to fix this. "You're bluffing," Graham said, taking another step closer, his voice steady. Ravok raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" Before he could react, Graham turned and signaled to Vance and Tara, who had quietly moved behind the reactor's control panel. They were already working, trying to access the system remotely to override Ravok's command. Tara's face was tense, her fingers flying over the console. While Vance kept a wary eye on their surroundings, Graham kept his eyes locked on Ravok. "I don't care who you think you are. You'll never control this colony," Ravok laughed. "You think you're a hero, don't you? You're just a grumpy mechanic. No one cares about you. You never mattered to anyone." The words stung, but Graham didn't flinch. In that moment, he knew Ravok was wrong. He had mattered. He mattered to the workers, to Tara, to Vance. He had led them through this crisis. And they had followed him, even when things looked impossible. They were all in this together. "You don't get it, do you?" Graham said, his voice low and cold. "This isn't about me. It's about them. The people who work day in and day out to keep this colony running, they matter. And I'm not going to let you take that away." Ravok's eyes narrowed. "You're just like all the others. No one has the power to stop me." Graham could feel his anger rising, but he forced it down. "You may have the power to destroy, but you don't have the power to build. You don't have the loyalty, the heart, the grit of these people. You're nothing." The words hung in the air for a moment, and for a brief second, Ravok's confident smile faltered. It was just enough before Ravok could react. Vance slammed his hand onto a nearby switch, and the lights in the chamber blinked out. A moment later, the emergency lights flickered back on, bathing the room in a soft, eerie glow. The countdown on the reactor had stopped. Graham's heart raced, but he didn't waste a second. He lunged at Ravok, knocking the man away from the control panel. Ravok stumbled back, surprised by the sudden force, but quickly regained his balance. The two men squared off, each aware that the fate of the colony hung in the balance. "You think this changes anything?" Ravok sneered, reaching for a nearby console to regain control. "You can't stop what's already been set in motion." Graham shook his head. "You don't get it. You may have started this, but you won't finish it." The battle for the colony, the fight between Graham and Ravok, was fierce. Ravok was taller, stronger, but Graham was quick and determined. He ducked and dodged Ravok's attacks, landing several quick blows of his own. The two men clashed like thunder and lightning, each strike filled with anger and frustration. But Graham knew this wasn't just a fight for control. It was a fight for the people of the colony. Tara and Vance continued to work, their fingers flying over the control panels, trying to reverse the sabotage. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows on the walls. Every second counted. "We've almost got it," Tara called out, her voice tight with concentration. "Just a little more time." Graham barely heard her, his focus solely on Ravok. With a powerful kick, Graham sent Ravok crashing into the nearby wall, but the man was quick to recover. Pushing himself up with a growl of frustration, Ravok's eyes were filled with rage. "You're a fool. You've made a mistake, human. Do you really think they'll respect you? The Council never did. They're just using you to get what they need." Graham's eyes burned with fury. "I'm not doing this for the Council. I'm doing this for the people. For the workers who have put everything into this colony. They deserve better than you," Ravok's grin returned. "And what happens when they realize they've been following a dead man? You can't save them. The reactor's countdown is inevitable." Graham's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't let Ravok's words shake him. He had to act fast. He charged forward, tackling Ravok to the ground. The two men wrestled, their strength clashing in the air. But Graham knew that this was the moment that would decide everything, with one last effort. Graham twisted Ravok's arm behind his back, forcing the man to release his grip on the control panel. He slammed Ravok's head into the ground, knocking him unconscious. Ravok was done victory at last. Tara and Vance both stepped forward as Graham stood up, panting heavily, looking down at the unconscious body of Ravok. "Is it done?" Tara asked, her voice filled with hope. Graham nodded. "It's done." Vance rushed to the control panel, typing in a few final commands. The reactor stabilized. "The countdown has stopped." The room fell silent for a moment, and then the emergency lights flickered off, replaced by the steady hum of the colony's power grid. The lights flickered to life, bright and steady. The colony was safe. Tara let out a sigh of relief. "We did it." Graham glanced at her and then at Vance. For the first time since this all began, he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Yeah, we did. Aftermath. As the dust settled, the workers began to file into the reactor chamber, eyes wide with relief and gratitude. They had feared the worst, but now they saw the grumpy human they had once feared in a new light. Graham wasn't just the engineer who fixed the machines. He was their hero, the one who had saved them all. Tara and Vance stood beside him, their expressions filled with respect. They had followed his lead when no one else would, and it had paid off. The colony was safe, thanks to Graham Ward, as the council finally arrived. Their faces filled with shock and disbelief. Graham didn't care. They had ignored the problem until it was almost too late, and they would have to live with that. But for now, he had one goal: to make sure the workers had the future they deserved. And as the lights of Sector 9 flickered on once more, it was clear that they had a future thanks to a grumpy human who cared enough to fight for it.